In general use, a civilian is a person who is not a member of the police, the armed forces, or a fire department. This use distinguishes from persons whose duties involve risking their lives to protect the public at large from hazardous situations such as terrorism, riots, conflagrations, and wars. Under international humanitarian law, civilians are persons who are not members of the armed forces, and are not combatants if they carry arms openly and respect the laws and customs of war. It is slightly different from a non-combatant, as some non-combatants are not civilians. Civilians in the territories of a party to an armed conflict are entitled to certain privileges under the customary laws of war and international treaties such as the Fourth Geneva Convention. The privileges that they enjoy under international law depends on whether the conflict is an internal one or an international one. The word civilian goes back to the late 14th century and is from Old French civilian. Of the civil law, civilian is believed to have been used to refer to non-combatants as early as 1829. The term non-combatant now refers to people in general who are not taking part of hostilities, rather than just civilians. The International Committee of the Red Cross 1958 Commentary on 1949 Geneva Convention IV relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war states, every person in enemy hands must have some status under international law. He is either a prisoner of war and, as such, covered by the Third Convention, a civilian covered by the Fourth Convention, or again, a member of the medical personnel of the armed forces who is covered by the First Convention. There is no intermediate status. Nobody in enemy hands can be outside the law. We feel that this is a satisfactory solution, not only satisfying to the mind, but also, and above all, satisfactory from the humanitarian point of view. The Cross has expressed the opinion that, if civilians directly engage in hostilities, they are considered unlawful or unprivileged combatants or belligerents. They may be prosecuted under the domestic law of the detaining state for such action. Article 50 of the 1977 Protocol I additional to the Geneva Conventions provides. The definition is negative and defines civilians as persons who do not belong to definite categories. The categories of persons mentioned in Article 4A of the Third Convention and in Article 43 of the Protocol I are combatants. Therefore, the commentary to the protocol pointed that anyone who is not a member of the armed forces and does not take off hostilities is a civilian. Civilians cannot take part in armed conflict. Civilians are given protection under the Geneva Conventions and protocols thereto. Article 51 describes the protection that must be given to the civilian population and individual civilians. Chapter 3 of Protocol I regulates the targeting of civilian objects. Article 8 of the 1998 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court also includes this in its list of war crimes, intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such or against individual civilians not taking part in hostilities. Not all states have ratified 1977 Protocol I or the 1998 Rome Statute. But it is an accepted principle of international humanitarian law that the direct targeting of civilians is a breach of the customary laws of war and is binding on all belligerents. The actual position of the civilian in modern war remains problematic. It is complicated by a number of phenomena, including, starting in the 1980s, it was often claimed that 90% of the victims of modern wars were civilians. These claims, though widely believed, are not supported by detailed examination of the evidence, particularly that relating to wars that are central to the claims in the opening years of the 21st century. Despite the many problems associated with it, the legal category of the civilian has been the subject of considerable attention in public discourse, in the media and at the United Nations, and in justification of certain uses of armed force to protect endangered populations. It has lost none of its political, legal and moral salience, although it is often assumed that civilians are essentially passive onlookers of war. Sometimes they have active roles in conflicts. These may be quasi-military, as when in November 1975 the Moroccan government organized the Green March of civilians to cross the border into the former Spanish colony of Western Sahara to claim the territory for Morocco. All at the same time as Moroccan forces entered the territory clandestinely. In addition, and without necessarily calling into question their status as non-combatants, civilians sometimes take part in campaigns of non-violent civil resistance as a means of opposing dictatorial rule or foreign occupation. Sometimes such campaigns happen at the same time as armed conflicts or guerrilla insurrections.